I saw someone post a similar story on here, so I figured I'd share my own experience. It was March of 2019. I was 21 at the time. I'm also a male. I was getting gas at a gas station near my house in a suburban area. A disheveled-looking woman came up to me asking if I knew where the nearest CVS was. I told her it was just up the road for about 7 minutes until you reach a major intersection on a business district, then you'll see it on the left. There was an uncomfortably long pause until she asked me, "Can we have a ride?" While looking behind me, I turn around and there's a man standing on the other side of my truck looking at us. I politely told her no, and that I was heading in a different direction. Without saying anything, she nodded, and they both left, walking away from the gas station. They had sketched me out, and also had a bag full of firearms and ammunition. I was taken to the gun range on the rear seats of my truck, so I wasn't in a position to give two sketchy-looking people a ride. While thinking it was a strange encounter, I got in my truck and drove away. I thought nothing of it. Less than a month goes by, and my mom calls me to tell me she's watching someone on the news about how a man and a woman were approaching younger-looking women at a local stop and shop, asking directions and a ride to the close CVS. One of those people were so suspicious of the situation, they did what I should have done and called the non-emergency police number. I look at the news report myself, and it was the same two people. It turned out those two had connections to a human trafficking ring. Their operation was apparently to get into someone's car and then force them to drive them to a car they had parked at another location, and then take the now kidnapped person to God knows where. Not really sure how that part was discovered, whether through police interrogation or just an assumption. All I can say is to be careful out there. Anyone can be picked up by traffickers, male or female, even in a relatively safe neighborhood. Don't just give anyone a ride. I can't find the news report or article from the day, but if I do, I'll post it in the comments. When I was about 14 in high school, I was really naive, nice, shy, and never had a boyfriend. Typical good girl. I used to take 2 buses to get home. One day I got off my second bus to walk home after school. This guy also got off. He looked about 16 or 17 and started talking to me. This was over 10 years ago, so I don't really remember exactly what he told me. But he said I was pretty and asked for my number. Me being dumb, younger girl, gave him my number. I asked him where he lived, and he just said around this area, so I just figured he was friendly. He started texting me, and one day he asked if I wanted to hang out after school at the park, and I said yes again, being the dumb girl I was. Finally, the day we were supposed to meet up arrives. I tell my friends I'm meeting with this guy after school. I kid you not, an hour before school ends, a thunderstorm appears. Heavy rain and thunder. So I text the guy and tell him that I can't meet him because of the weather, and suggested we can meet at a coffee shop instead. He said he was already outside my school. Why wasn't this guy in school too? So he ended up saying yes to my coffee idea. We get there, eat, and I ask him if we were commuting back together, but he said he had something else to do. After that, I never heard from him or saw him again. For weeks, I looked for him in the bus to see if he was around, but he just disappeared. I'm not sure, but as I got older and thought about it, everything just seemed so odd. He never told me what high school he went to. I don't even remember his name, nor ever saw him around the neighborhood again. It's like he vanished. Sometimes I feel like he was planning to hurt me at the park or take me somewhere else, but that thunderstorm saved me. I'll never know, but I'm glad things worked out the way they did. Growing up, my parents were stereotypical overprotective immigrant parents, but after that encounter, I understand why. I'm the youngest of 3, and I have an autistic and unfortunately born with a mental retardation older brother. We are fairly close to the same age. So we did pretty much everything together when we were children. It was easier for my parents. I always took care of my brothers in general, but I always kept an extra cautious eye on my autistic relative. My mom is the strong but always nervous type, always trying to think ahead, trying to protect her own, an incredible mama bear who never tires. She taught me to never trust strangers. Don't get in someone's car you don't know. Never follow someone you've never met before who tells you that mom and dad has sent him to pick you up. She would always have a meeting with our school to allow me to travel by bus with my brother. Because we live close to the school, the government rarely let me take the yellow school bus. But my brother was allowed the state-funded privilege. In the end, even if I didn't have permission, the bus drivers were so nice, they let me tag along with him anyway. So with that said, in primary school, we would have always take the yellow school bus to go to and back from school. One day as usual, the bus dropped us off at the end of our street, and we had to walk to our apartment. Usually my mom would open the door for us, even if my oldest brother was home. She never let us answer the door when we were kids for obvious reasons. That day, however, my parents weren't home. We were ringing and knocking, but we never had any answer. A car eventually pulled up in front of the building. Luckily, we had a relatively long walkway that separated the sidewalk from the stairs, so they couldn't get to us easily. Suddenly, a woman came out halfway from the passenger seat and waved at us, probably to signal us to approach. While she was gesturing, the rear door opened. That's when I realized she wasn't alone. I couldn't correctly identify who that person was, since her overall shape wasn't familiar and the car was a little far from where we were standing. So I went down a few steps to slightly approach them, but I just couldn't recognize her face. I really felt uneasy, so I took my brother's hand and we started running. Pure instinct, and the voice of my mom in the back of my head, imagining her reprimanding me if I took the risk to approach those strangers. It was winter and we stumbled on ice, but we were quick to get up and keep on running. I'm actually not even sure if my brother understood the whole situation. He is still a smart cookie, even with all of his difficulties. So I always wondered. Mind you, we weren't even 11 and 12 years old at the time. Yes, the car chased after us, but they weren't able to catch up. We arrived fairly quickly to the neighbor's house. The car sped off when my neighbor opened the door, which made the situation even more accurate with what I thought it was. It clearly was a kidnapping attempt. When my mom was made aware of the situation, she almost had a heart attack, feeling like she could have lost us. She spent days afterwards calling everyone she knew to ask if the strangers were in fact just family or friends. No one came that day, and even so, they'd always call to be sure we were home before passing. Actually, everyone was dumbfounded, but the story doesn't end there. A few weeks before this incident, we were getting a bunch of random phone calls, and with no one at the other end. It would ring at 2 to 3 in the morning, 6 in the morning, or in the middle of the afternoon. And it happened so frequently, but being a child, I never felt any red flags from these phone calls. At most, I found them annoying. A few months ago, I put all the pieces together. My mother was especially protective and always on alert mode. Probably because she knew that someone was trying to see if we were home alone when they called. I think those people were watching us for a while, trying to take action. I don't know, we just happened to be alone when they were passing by. I don't think the phone calls and the right timing is a coincidence. Shortly after, the phone call stopped. We moved out of the apartment a few months later, and we never had anything like this happen to us since. Growing up, I always wondered what would have happened if the bus drivers weren't nice enough to let me ride with my brother. Would he have gotten in their car? I'm actually grateful I was with him that day. I can't imagine what would have happened if he was alone and targeted by those monsters. I don't remember what year it was exactly, but I was about 13 or 14. It was around 8 p.m. in the summer, and I decided to go for a walk to the local shop to get a drink. I lived on the main street in my small town, and the shop was just a few blocks away. Nothing too weird ever really happened, and almost everybody knew each other. I often went out alone by myself during both night and day and never felt scared. As I was walking back home on this particular night, a van pulled over to the side of the road next to me. It was an older guy, and he said, "Nikki. Hey, Nikki." I was confused and told him my name wasn't Nikki. He said, "Oh, sorry, you looked an awful like my niece Nikki," thinking it was a mistake since it was dark out. I just said it was fine and continued walking. Instead of driving away, he tried to keep talking to me, asked me my name and where I was going. At this point, I knew something was up. I ignored him. I started to pick up the pace. For a while after that, I was terrified that he would follow me home or that he would find me again, especially since my parents worked an awful lot and I was often home alone. I was about 8 years old, at the exit of my school, where all the kids wait for their parents, waiting for my babysitter, who would always pick me up at 5:30 p.m. I was a bit confused as my babysitter wasn't there. She was never late, but I did not panic. I kept waiting patiently. Suddenly, a woman in her 40s, long curly brown hair, with a disturbing, smiling expression, came up from the group of parents and said to me, "Your mother sent me to pick you up." She clearly saw my confused face and thought I was an easy catch. Her face, her appearance, and those words she told me were a lot of red flags at once for me. I had never seen her in my life. And if such a thing happened, she picking me up? My mother would have warned me. All those thoughts passed through my 8-year-old head in a few seconds. I responded, moving my head to side in denial. She never stopped staring at me with this psycho expression and repeated the same thing, this time slightly approaching me, ready to take my arm. Looking over her shoulder and other parents in the entrance, I could notice a black van parked, which I never saw before. I was always aware of the parked cars because once we saw a Lambo and we were willing to see it again. That was too much. At that age, I already realized her intentions were not good. And this situation was too strange. I didn't move an inch and said, "No," again in a calm voice. The woman knew she wouldn't be successful in her try. She knew she couldn't take me by force because all the other parents and some teachers were around. She didn't say another word. She took her eyes off me and stood there, looking for another child, pretending she was looking for someone else. A few minutes later, my babysitter arrived and I told her. She was very surprised and pissed, but she didn't go to alert the school. At the time, I just thought about going home, but now, 16 years later, I think we should have done that. I was aware of kids being kidnapped in my neighborhood, so I knew this could happen. I will never forget how that woman looked, and I hope nothing ever happened to any kid at that school.